So, Andor returned recently, and it has already generated that dreaded discussion in Star Wars fandom about whether this is Star Wars for adults, whatever that means. This typically refers to the show's content, its depiction of violence, sexualized assault, and even drug use. We're not really going to delve into that because this sort of moral hand-wringing tends to overlook Star Wars' long history of depicting violence, sexualized assault, and even drug use.
Wanna buy some death sticks?
You don't want to sell me death sticks.
Indeed, while it's up to every parent to determine what is or is not appropriate for their children to watch, it is worth acknowledging that there is nothing on Andor that was not also depicted on syndicated family-friendly science fiction shows like Star Trek The Next Generation or Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It is very easy to fall into the trap of assuming what is and is not appropriate for kids. As a 12-year-old kid who loved PG-rated Hammer horror movies, Deep Space Nine, and The X-Files, I would have devoured Andor.
He'll eat anything. Eat those trugs.
That was a dare.
This is still a Star Wars show. Its heroes might be a little more morally complex and conflicted, but the series still clearly delineates between good and evil. This is not a show like Breaking Bad, Mad Men, or The Sopranos that relies on a mature audience's sensibility, or a female lead irrationally hated by a vocal online audience to cleverly deduce that maybe these dudes aren't great.
I don't think I can help you.
What are you talking about?
I mean therapeutically.
Still, setting aside the issue of content and accepting that Andor is still a show accessible to younger audiences, it's worth asking what makes Andor feel more mature than the vast majority of modern franchise streaming shows. What is it that sets the show apart in its storytelling, its character work, and its world building from so many of its contemporaries? What does it mean to be mature Star Wars? We're going to talk very broadly about the show. We will include some spoilers. If you haven't seen it yet, you probably really should. It's one of the best shows of the year so far, and not just among franchise entertainment. It is a Star Wars show that deserves to be put alongside Adolescence, Severance, and The Pit when discussing the year's best television. So you can pause the video here, go watch the show, and or come back later. So with that in mind, punch it. A lot of the discussion of modern franchise media tends to focus on content. This is because audiences have been trained to prioritize content, to treat film and television shows as plot delivery mechanisms. This is reflected in the way that we talk about this media. We literally call it content. We produce recaps, explainers, and listicles. It's very easy to reduce so much modern entertainment to sets of quotable lines.
I've got a bad feeling about it.
Quiet.
Collections of cameos, and images just waiting to be turned into GIFs. This contentification of media tends to flatten conversations about film and television, leading to discussions that focus on what the story is rather than how the story is told. There are lots of technical reasons why so much modern streaming media looks so flat and generic, often tied to issues like bandwidth compression or technical decisions imposed by the production studio rather than motivated by the creative team. However, this flatness reflects something more fundamental. A lot of modern media is primarily preoccupied with simply presenting plot, character, and references directly to the audience, with little consideration for any particularly sophisticated way of communicating that information to the audience outside of just pointing a camera directly at it and having a character bluntly exposit information.
Thrawn died at the Battle of Lothal.
His death was never confirmed.
And sure, why not just shoot it in front of a green screen so you can fix it in post later if you have to? Andor feels so different from so much modern franchise media because it actually thinks about how best to convey its ideas and concepts to the audience. It is concerned about form in a way that a lot of modern franchise media is not. If you show somebody who isn't intimately familiar with the cast of each individual Star Wars show a random clip from, say, The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, or Skeleton Crew, they'd probably struggle to identify which individual show that image came from. And yes, we did mix up the order, and most of you probably didn't even notice. In contrast, Andor has a very distinct texture. Part of this comes from the decision to largely shoot on location rather than in the volume, on green screen, or sound stages. Part of it also comes from the choice to recycle props from vintage objects like Polaroid cameras or credit card readers, which give the show a real texture. It's also reflected in the show's visual language, which is much more precise and carefully considered than many of its contemporaries, with recurring visual motifs like the use of mirrors in the early second season, or the framing of characters to appear like they're in cages throughout the first, that communicate central themes and ideas without needing to express those through dialogue. There is a level of sophistication in how Andor chooses to tell its story and communicate its ideas to the audience. More broadly, it's also reflected in how the show is written and edited. A lot of modern franchise entertainment is structured in a way that is aggressively linear and plot-driven. Characters have a goal to accomplish. They deliver exposition about that goal. Then we will cut to the direct obstacles or complications that stand in their way. Then there is a scene of them traveling. Then they arrive. Then they accomplish their goal and are set another goal to accomplish. This is a very straightforward way of telling a story, to the point where it often feels like characters in these shows are looking for maps to get directions to go to the next place that they need to go. There's a lot of and then plotting in these shows, which isn't a story so much as it's a list of things that happen. Andor adopts a different approach. The show has a large ensemble and it keeps cutting between them across huge distances of space. Often these characters are completely unrelated to one another, and their actions are completely distinct and motivated by factors unrelated to the previous scene. Halfway through the second season, Cassian Andor has yet to meet two of the show's other major characters, Senator Mon Mothma and Supervisor Dedra Meero. Instead, Andor trusts the audience to understand how these characters relate to one another, without having to thread them into a simple linear plot. The audience understands that Andor and Mothma are both fighting for the rebellion, just on different fronts. The audience also understands that Meero is the greatest threat to Andor, even though she is completely unaware of his existence. These characters are bound together by ripples and unintended consequences. This sense of sprawl is a large part of what Andor is about how seemingly disconnected lives and events intertwine in unlikely ways to fashion a larger narrative.
Everyone has their own rebellion.
How Andor tells this story is connected to the story that Andor is telling. How the story is told is what the story is. Freed from the burden of conventional linear plotting, Andor can engage in richer thematic work. For example, the second arc of the second season sets up a recurring thread with Saul Guerrera, played by Forrest Whitaker. This thread does not connect directly to the events around it. It is self-contained. Plot-wise, it could easily be trimmed from these episodes and the events would still make sense. However, this self-contained thread is essential to understanding what this arc is about. Saul's arc is paralleled with what is happening on the planet Gorman, where the Empire and the Rebellion are both feeding misinformation in the hopes of trapping one another.
Feeding false information is what they do. You're aware of that? They're pretty good at it.
Saul's arc involves a similar beat, where Saul feeds false information to a traitor and then kills him to mislead the Empire. More to the point, both the Empire and the Rebellion are threatening to destroy Gorman, to consume it in flames.
If it goes up in flames,
It will burn. Very brightly.
The choice of language here is very deliberate and evocative. Saul's plot thread in this arc culminates in a grand speech where he talks about how revolution is literally combustible, using the metaphor of the fuel that he is trying to steal.
The thing that explodes when there's too much friction in the air. That's freedom calling!
Saul's entire plot thread is a poetic and lyrical way of expressing the ideas that play out in the plots around them, illustrating to the audience that these ideas do not exist in isolation, but in conversation.
And maybe you breathe just a little too deeply, burn from the inside. Or you die loud, boom, burn from the outside.
It's a choice that prioritizes theme and character over plot and continuity. And it's illustrative of the different way that Andor tells its story compared to The Mandalorian or Ahsoka.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
This structure also allows the show to engage in dramatic irony, which is not often possible within the blunt expository linear framework of these franchise shows. In the first season, Cassian helps conduct a daring payroll robbery. This prompts the Empire to launch a series of crackdowns on civil liberties. While he's holidaying in space Florida, Andor is arrested using these new rules. Meanwhile, while Andor is shipped off to an Imperial labor camp, the Empire continues its hunt for the rebels responsible for the heist, unaware that it has Cassian in custody. The show also employs dialogue in a different way to its contemporaries, allowing characters to speak in grand soliloquies that express their perspectives and their beliefs.
I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
Without having to reduce these figures to catchphrases
Hello there.
or blunt exposition.
You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did.
The characters who appear in this narrative all appear because they are essential, with showrunner Tony Gilroy openly talking about how he decided not to include cameos from Darth Vader or the Emperor just to appease fans or to make it feel more like Star Wars. In contrast, while Andor doesn't lean heavily on continuity and fan service, it has a curiosity about filmmaking and storytelling that extends beyond just Wikipedia articles. Much like Lucas drew from The Hidden Fortress or The Dam Busters in making Star Wars, Andor quotes liberally from works as disparate as The Battle of Algiers and The Sound of Music. This gives the series a set of tools that aren't readily available to other Star Wars shows. The series uses montage to convey a sense of scale and scope absent from so many of its contemporaries, reminding the audience of the various characters whose lives are caught up in the drama, even though they may not have directly interacted. Speaking of the way the show's edited, it can also employ dissonance, playing upbeat EDM music over disarmingly bleak imagery. It can follow a character from a meeting planning a genocide to a sitcom-esque plot about meeting your partner's mother. It can employ a sharp contrast in the images that it cuts between, cutting from the scarred survivors of an Imperial raid to a decadent wedding celebration, and then cutting from that to blackness and silence, trusting the audience to make sense of that juxtaposition of these seemingly conflicted images. And Andor does all of this without abandoning what makes Star Wars so fun. This has all the great Star Wars tropes, from cool little puppet aliens, to space battles, to questionable workplace safety regulations when it comes to guardrails on catwalks at a height, to hotshot space pilots who maybe aren't as good as they say they are, to veteran character actors who are just so excited to get to wear a cape and a set of gloves. Also, it's just kinda cool to know what the Emperor's energy policy is. I mean, what else did you think it was gonna be?
Access to stable, unlimited...
Andor asks a little more from its audience than a lot of contemporary franchise shows, employing slightly more advanced storytelling techniques to communicate its ideas in a more elegant fashion. It doesn't speak down to its audience, and refuses to patronize them. In that sense, much more than any moral panic about the violence depicted on screen, Andor feels more mature than most modern Star Wars. When it comes to quality, Andor is in a world of its own, in a galaxy far, far away. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.